Welcome to Thrive with Asbury Seminary. I'm your host, Wes Wilcox, and today my guest is Dr. Jonathan Powers. Dr. Powers is the Associate Dean of the E. Stanley Jones School of Mission and Ministry and the Assistant Professor of Worship Studies here at Asbury Seminary. So we're very grateful to have him on today. Dr. Powers, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm glad to have you on the podcast, and wanted to bring you on to talk about two of your most recent book projects. And so I think we'll start with this one, which is New Life in Christ, New Life in the Risen Christ, a Wesleyan Theology of Baptism. Yeah. So tell me, just how did this project come about, and what caused you to want to put this book together?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I did a doctorate at the Robert Webber Institute for Worship Studies before I started working on my PhD. And my doctorate project at the Robert Webber Institute for Worship Studies, or IWS as we call it, my doctorate, or doctoral focus, my thesis focus, there was on the relationship between baptism and catechesis or discipleship. And so I really wanted to look into the rite of baptism. What does it mean? What is the significance? And how does that relate to our walk in Christ, our relationship with Christ, and our just our life as Christians? You know, so and then how does that then connect to things like worship and all that? So I started that, and in fact, it started earlier on than when I was doing like the final thesis project, like the doctoral thesis. I was starting to look into it a little bit earlier in some studies, and was just really drawn to it. For a few different reasons, I was really intrigued by the early church, their practices of catechism in leading up to baptism, and why they did what they did. But then also looking at John Wesley and his process of discipleship that he did with his bands and classes and societies, you know. Yeah. And there was this line in Wesley it was either one of his letters or journals, I can't remember off the top of my head, but one of his letters or journals, it was a letter actually, he was writing to someone, and he said, "I consider the members of the Methodist societies to be lifelong catechumens." I thought it was interesting because he's using language from the early church to talk about these societies. Yeah. But he's looking at a context where everyone is baptized as a infant, pretty much, you know, in the Church of England. And the early catechisms, the catechesis process were for those coming into the church from, you know, as it was going out into secular areas. They were coming into the church, and as they were coming into the church, this was a way to fit them for life in the church and in the kingdom, and to help them know just even the context of the story of God and the work of Christ and what that means for them in their lives, and then how they are to live accordingly. You know, what does it mean to be a Christian and to live as a Christian? So they're fitting people for the kingdom and fitting people for life in the church and as a Christian and all that. So all that just intrigued me as I was looking through this and this process of that, and where, you know, the relationship between baptism and Easter, and, you know, these types of things in the early church, especially. So I was intrigued in that, and part of this too was just felt that, you know, there is such a need for good discipleship in the church. There always has been, you know. So I can't say like especially today. I think every era has said especially today. You know? But we can say it too. Especially today, there is need for good discipleship in the church. And so I was already kind of leaning in that, but saying but discipleship has to be more than just this cognitive process. Like, what is it? Like this truly transformational process. And seeing Jesus's words in Matthew 28, where he connects baptism and discipleship, where he says, "Go make disciples." You know, it's the command he gives, and as you go make disciples, you do this by baptizing them and teaching them to obey all I have commanded you. And that teaching is the same root. The word there is the same root as catechesis, catechizing them into all that I have commanded. You know.
Oh, okay.
So you saw that discipleship has this intricate connection between baptism and catechism have this intricate relationship with one another in the process of discipleship. So all of this is just like, I'm just really, because I'm doing youth ministry at the time. What does it mean to invest in youth and try to help them grow as Christians and all this? So all of this is just kind of sitting on me and looking at it. So I do that doctoral research. So that's like really long background to that part of it. And then as I finished that project, not long after I finished that project, I started teaching here at the seminary as an adjunct. And I'm teaching a sacramental theology class. And right when I start teaching that sacramental theology class, Dr. Jason Vickers releases a book called A Wesleyan Theology of the Eucharist. And it's a great book. It's a lot of scholars coming together and contributing chapters on the Eucharist to look at all these different facets and dynamics of the Eucharist and why is it significant in our lives? You know, how do we cultivate a sacramental worldview? And what is the significance of the sacraments in the church, you know, as well as in the Christian life, and even in theology. So he's doing all that work in that book, and really have loved it, used that in my sacramental theology classes. And I see Jason at a conference, you know, months later after that comes out, after I've used it in my class, and told him, like, this is a great book. I really love this. I would love to see a companion to it on baptism. You know, that'd be great. And he was like, yeah, that'd be a really fantastic idea, like that, to have those together, you know, great idea. So it's just kind of a dream. It was like, I just kept thinking, like, somebody needs to do that, you know? And so I'm talking with some folks at the conference too, and go to some of the publishers and stuff, and I see that book laying at a table. I said, you know what y'all really need to do, the folks that published Jason's book, so what you need to do is create a companion to that. And they said, hey, that's a great idea. Why don't you do it? And I was like, oh, me do it? I was
you were like,
somebody.
I just thought it was a good idea.
Right,
I
exactly.
wasn't offering myself. But,
exactly.
yeah.
But then I was like, well, this is my doctoral research. I've already done work in this. I have a passion for it and a vision for the book, you know. I mean, okay, yeah, maybe this is something that I should do. And I could be the one to help make this happen. And there's support in some other areas. Also, had a conversation right around then with Dr. William Abraham, Billy as we call him. And Billy was talking to us about the need for more research and publications on baptism, especially in a Wesleyan theological viewpoint. You know, he said, we just need more material out there on baptism and on a Wesleyan view of baptism. And I told him, I was like, well, you know, I've got this idea for a book. There's some support some support for it and everything. And he said, you've got to do it. Like, you got to do it. And so all of those things came together, and I just felt like, okay, this is a book I've got to do. And
So what time period was this when this was all coming about?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's 2023 now. And I think the initial conversations started in the spring of 2018, because it was after I'd started here full time. Okay. So Jason's book had been out a couple years, and then we go to this conference, and that's when some of those conversations started. So I think it was the spring of 2018, the initial conversations started, and then that summer of 2018, I started working on a proposal for it.
Okay. So did you always envision it as a collaborative book that would involve a lot of different voices and a lot of different scholarly people coming in and writing on different topics? Was that always the goal?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, you know, there's validity and a lot of value in saying, here's a person that has done this work and they're setting this forth and all that, and the research that you have done to put that out there and everything, and we need that. It's so important. But for this, I just thought baptism is such a controversial topic, right? I mean,
it can be, yes.
Yeah, it can be. When should it happen? Who should be baptized?
How should it happen?
How should it happen? Yeah. I mean, all of these things. And there's a lot of different practices, a lot of different convictions about baptism out there that I thought, you know, for something like this, and to say a Wesleyan theology of baptism, to have multiple voices come together and present a single coherent vision, but based off of Wesley's own material, like everybody's interacting with the same foundational sources. Now from there, you know, going into different things, but here are the two major sources we're all working with. To start there and to say, here's a coherent vision that we are all coming together and putting forth, really strengthens it. To say, like, look, this is not just my opinion, or this is not just, I researched this and I was very biased by these scholars or this era or something like that. But to say, like, no, this is a number of people coming together in agreement to set forth a coherent vision. To me, it made sense. Also, seeing it as a companion to Jason's Theology of the Eucharist book, I said that's what he did for his book for the same reasons. I thought, well, I want to match that. I want to follow that. So these really can be seen as companion pieces, even though they're actually published with different publishers. But the two of us have really considered them to be companion pieces. We just really, thought that that approach, both of us, as we even talked about, said that approach. There's just something to it, and you get to hear multiple voices. And the nice thing too is a book like this, you don't necessarily have to read it from page 1 to the very last page. You can say, well, I'm going to read this chapter, then I go to this chapter. You can go through it. There's an organizing structure to it, but it also gives freedom to say, well, I want to, I'm really interested in this. So I want to jump to it first, and then I can come back to this or whatever. And so,
and I found that interesting reading through it was. Because you can jump in at any chapter, and they're self-contained. It's not, it's not like one follows necessarily directly from the last. And so I did like that aspect of it. So with your chapter on baptism and discipleship, how did you arrive on that being your topic that you were going to focus on?
I mean, the very short answer was I'd already written it for my dissertation.
So that was your dissertation.
My doctorate. I mean, not totally. That's kind of a cop-out answer, but I'd already, that's where the focus of my research was, and I felt like so for every chapter, I tried to find someone who was an expert in that field, or someone that in this kind of work, so like Mike Pasquarello does the one on Trinity, like the baptism in the Trinity. And he's done a lot of work on Trinitarian theology and Trinitarian preaching even. And his dissertation was on the Book of Prayer and a lot of the doxological aspects and Trinitarian kind of proclamations, things like that within the Book of Common Prayer. So with his research, it just made sense. It was like, would you want to do this, some others too. I know that you've looked at this aspect of Wesley's theology, or I know that you've done a lot of teaching in Wesleyan doctrine. So tried to match those things up really well. And so for myself, I thought if somebody came to me and asked me, hey, I'm doing a book on baptism, what is it that you are the most honed in on and would consider yourself to be the expert in some degree, to some degree. What would that be? I would say, well, the relationship between baptism and discipleship. So it was where my passion was, my research was, my strengths were. So that all kind of converged. But also, I had done this research, and I thought it was important research. I thought, like, I discovered so much in this that was helpful to me and has shaped so much of my own understanding and formation, and even thinking about practice in the church and what does it mean, convictions for what we should be doing in the church practically. All that, I wanted that I want others to know, and thought like, well, if it sits over here in this thesis project, I mean, nobody's ever going to read it, but my supervisors and, hopefully somebody in my family once perused through it a little bit. But, I wanted to get it out there, and so I felt like this is a good way to do that too. So just a lot that came together in that sense.
To transition a little bit further into the book, one of the other topics that really jumped out to me, and we had talked about it just for our podcast audience to know, we've had a conversation about this prior to this one that we're having now, but one of the chapters that I found really interesting that we had talked about was Baptism and People with Developmental Disabilities by David F. Watson. And that just that title alone, I mean, I would think most people think, well, that's pretty unique. That's definitely stands out. So why did you choose that topic, and why was he the best person to write about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, David's an amazing scholar and thinker and leader. He's He's a dean at United Theological Seminary and a professor there. So I just really value him and respect him in general. But David has a son with Down syndrome, and he's done a lot of work on developmental disabilities and the church and what that means, and matters of faith and all that, and holding together really good theological principles with just the reality of life in these in certain circumstances and things. And so he immediately came to mind for that. But in a book like this, and I've had some people even say this, like, well, I'm really surprised there's not a chapter on baptism and infant baptism, basically, or believers' baptism. Like, you don't get into that. And it's like, well, but it's like in every chapter almost in some way. Like it comes back to it in some way. And so I didn't feel like we had to do it in its own standalone chapter, because we're trying to create a broader theological vision to where you can then understand why, this is what Wesleyans have done, for the long history of the Wesleyan tradition. So there's that piece. But the other part of it is I thought, it'd be interesting to approach this from a different angle, because we do put so much cognitive pressure, in a modern, like a modern influenced, modernity influenced culture. We can call it postmodern at this point, whatever, but just say that the modern era, which was so focused on rationality and reason and cognitive ability, it's really put the emphasis of a lot of spirituality and religion and faith on the mind. What do I believe? What can I articulate? Those types of things. And not that those things are unimportant, but to say like it's kind of been reduced just to those things. As long as I can give a thumbs up to this set of principles, then I'm good, And so baptism, it tends to be very much individual focused, or it tends to be very focused on, a cognitive ability to understand or accept what's happening and things like that. Again, not that those things are unimportant, but when it's reduced to only that, it becomes problematic. And so as I've taught on this and as I've done some research, I've actually thought that. I was like, well, what about persons that don't have the cognitive functioning that we would consider normative, and if someone has a severe mental disability, for whatever reason, they were born with it or something happened later on, but there's something there. Does that mean that they could never be baptized? Because the way that we treat baptism a lot of times, you have to make this confession or profession of faith. You have to do this. Means no, they can't. If that is our hard and firm stance. Or there's some like gymnastics that happen to make exceptions for it. I thought, well, I want to think about the grace of God in a more encompassing way. What that means. And so I really wanted a chapter that tackled that and really dove into the nuances of it to say, well, let's think about the grace of God, how grace works in our lives. So think about what baptism is, what baptism marks in our lives, what realities are present in baptism, and just even to what we were just saying, to say it's not that baptism, like you just do it and you're done and it's good to go. It's like, no, there's still a growth there. But to say there's something about, helping those grow and incorporating them in the life of the church and fitting them for life in the kingdom, and saying we're still doing that even though their abilities might not be the same as someone else's, in whatever way. We're still doing that as the church, and that's important. And to say, and this person, because of whatever reasons, might never be able to make a public profession of faith and all of this, come down to an altar or something like that, but we're really thinking about God's grace in a different way, especially in the sense of God's grace goes before us. There's nothing we can do to earn God's grace or deserve God's grace. I think, especially infants, we go back to infants, who is the most where are we at our most helpless, as an infant, and to say, well, God always comes before us, and God's doing something before we can ever do anything, So as it begins to help us understand God's grace, even is where I'm going with that. How do we begin to understand God's grace at work in all of this? And David again has done such good work in it, and the chapter. I said this when we met, where I've not made it through his chapter yet without crying at some point. It's just beautiful. And that's the thing. It's just beautiful. He brings out the beauty of God and the beauty of God's work for us and in us and all that even the first time I read it to edit it, like in the editing process and all that, I still was like tearing up and everything. So I've not made it through yet without crying, because it just gives a beautiful picture of who God is and what God does.
When you were putting the whole thing together, did you have several topics in mind, or did you just reach out and know, I want these people to write and I'm going to open it up to them? I know for some you did have specific things, but was that across the board you had topics in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I can say yes and no, as you were just saying, because there were certain people like David, it's like, I was so happy that he did it, and he was very busy, and he was very gracious to do it for me, because it really does strengthen the book in just so many ways. But so someone like him, someone like Mike Pasquarello saying like, you'd just be fantastic at this. I'd love to have you. But also people I just wanted, even if it was like, if I didn't have a topic for either one of them, I would say like, yes, I want you, can we find something? There were a couple of people where I said, I just want you, do you have a topic that you would like to address? Because I'd just really like for you to be in the book. I think that was just a couple. Just about everybody, I sent them an idea at least. And just about everybody went with that. There were, as we were working together, so this was a group project, I edited it and did a lot of that work and everything, and had someone that assisted me on a lot of this, Laura Garverick, who has a chapter in there too, really helped me a lot in kind of giving an extra eye to things and some feedback on some stuff. So I really appreciate all of her work on it too. But there were a couple of people, as I was writing, they said, hey, have you thought about contacting this person? And especially maybe to write something on this. So that came out, we'd looked at it, and, it started off, I don't remember how many chapters I started with, but it kept expanding, to more and more chapters. Yeah, so it's kind of an organic process in that way. I went in with my original list and topics and contacted people, and then from there, or my list and people, contacted those people and got that core together, and then, even where we just realized, we don't have a chapter addressing this topic. So it was kind of this ongoing process. It started probably about, 2/3 the size of what it is, and then ended up being this final.
Yeah. No, and I think that's how a lot of projects go. You come in with one idea, and then in this case, talking to other people, it expands and becomes something bigger and probably better than what you envisioned at the very beginning. Yeah. So that's very cool. Yeah. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you've had 2 projects that have come out rather recently, both for the church and also for individuals to use. And so the second one we're going to talk about is this hymnal, Our Great Redeemer's Praise. All right, and so you had to have been working on both of these almost simultaneously. Yeah,
it gave me something to do during COVID. Both of them. I was doing a lot of editing, and and really they were really in alignment with each other. I think, like I said, about spring of 2018 is when the very first movements of the book on baptism started. Even though there wasn't an official proposal probably till the fall. At least some things got started there. And then I think it was 2019, probably the late spring of 2019, that we started on the hymnal, or maybe the late fall of 2018. But it wasn't too far. It was within the same academic year, at least, that both movements started on both of them. So the baptism thing I was kind of doing on my own here. With the contributors and all of that and the publisher, but that was me. Our Great Redeemer's Praise, that one was not my idea. That actually came from Seedbed. We started having conversations. I started having conversations with Seedbed and some other folks and saying, hey, we'd love to think about a hymnal? What if we proposed this, and what would it look like, and how would we try to go about this? So we had some initial conversations.
So did they come to you, or you went to them and were talking about an idea for a hymnal? How?
Yeah, well, we had done the Asbury hymnal for our chapel dedication. So that would have been spring, right, of 2018.
Yeah, that was.
That we rededicated Estes Chapel. That hymnal came out, and we used it. So it was probably somewhere within 6 to 9 months later after that. We were just talking, following up, said like, hey, we've done this hymnal. We worked well together on that. That was fun.
Yeah.
What if it was a more expansive hymnal? Because the Asbury hymnal was for Asbury. So this was not meant for, churches could pick it up and use it, but it wasn't done for that purpose. It was done for Asbury. What would it look like to be more intentional about doing a hymnal for churches, right? So that was more of just talk, And then we had a meeting, like some folks from Seedbed came up, and Julie Tennant and I got together with them in a more official meeting and said like, hey, look, we're like, this is getting more serious. Like we really want to consider this. And I think it could be a great opportunity for us in general, but especially with everything going on in the Methodist world right now, it could be a key resource with that. And so we started talking about that then, and I would say by fall of 2019, it was like, this is a go. We're going to move forward. Let's really get started. Maybe in that summer, I can't remember the timeline exactly, but let's really move forward with it, and start figuring out our process, like all that, so we got going on that. So it was again, start off, we had done this one project in this way. And then it was just kind of talk, and then kind of the same organic. It's like, well, hey, this could actually be a really important project.
Yeah. So what, if you can, because I know it was a big project and a big undertaking, and a lot went into it, but what was kind of the process and how you figured out what songs are going to go in there, and just how you all put the whole hymnal together?
So one of the first things that we did was say, well, let's take all those hymnals, the most recent hymnals, most recent publications from these Wesleyan traditions, and let's create spreadsheets of all of their indexes. So entering data or finding ways that you can like scan data and put it into spreadsheets. Some things we were able to scan data and put it into spreadsheets. Other things, Allison and Christian Clore spent a lot of time on a computer entering stuff. They are the real heroes, to be honest with you. Yeah. And Allison actually came up with the title too. So we did that work, and then did a comparison of those to say, all right, let's look at that data. Let's compare. We have this Nazarene hymnal, we have this Free Methodist hymnal, this Wesleyan hymnal, United Methodist hymnal, and let's look across, and some others too, but just as an example. Let's look across those. What appears in all of these? So like Amazing Grace, that's in all of them, And even if it was, we're like, that's one that's got to go in there, But especially if it appeared in all of them, we're creating a working index, So we're just going to create a working index. Anything that's in all of them, anything that's in 90% of them, anything that's in 75% of them, we're going to put in this. They just automatically go in that working index. Doesn't mean that we're going to keep them, but we're just putting them in our working index, right? Oh. And so you'd have like, 4,000 tongues to sing. I think that was in all of them. Hark the Herald Angels Sing, interesting, like, and Can It Be? It was like in 90% of them, but a couple of them it didn't make or something.
Didn't make the cut.
Yeah, it didn't make the cut. So, but we were like, but it's in enough, So we started there, and then anything that was at that 50, 60% or whatever, or lower, we just went through individually and just looked at those songs and said, what do we think about this song? Should it be,
What were those? Were those meetings where y'all literally sat down together and went through and talked about each song? Those had to be a long.
Yeah, we had a lot of these meetings, and some of them we just do on our own. Like, hey, look through these, look through, and some of them too. There was enough knowledge between like Julie and myself and Andy Miller from Seedbed that we could look through them and know a bunch of the songs and say like, okay, yeah, we're not, we don't need to research it and look at it. So we're like, we know that song, sure, let's put it on. But ones that we didn't, we'd look at. at least briefly. If there were ones, it was like, okay, this one appeared in the Salvation Army. I'm just, as an example. This one appeared only in the Salvation Army and none of the others. Say like, well, some of those we're just going to let go for now, unless we just look through the list and something stands out at us like, oh, yeah, that one should be in. Like, I don't know why, nobody else ever included it. An example of that would be, I don't think, like one song that didn't appear in too many of the hymnals was like, Oh, the Deep, Deep Love of Jesus, which I love.
Yeah.
It's a great song. But we were just like, oh, that's got to go in this hymnal. That's a wonderful song. We want to hold on to that one. So we just scanned through it quickly and then took some time to look through, it's really the ones kind of on the bubble in that middle place. Okay, it appeared in like 40 to 60% of these hymnals, right? So it's kind of on the verge there. It's kind of, not recognized enough or not kind of valued enough to make these other hymnals. Those were the ones that we really gave a lot of attention to. Should we keep it? Should we cut it? So that was a good question. So we did that process and created our working index. And so we had a good number. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but just say we had like 500 hymns, 470 hymns, something like that, in that working index just to start. And some of that was to say there might be some songs that we didn't put in this working index that still should go in here, but this is a working index. And some stuff in this working index that we're like, yeah, 90% of the hymnals included this one, but we don't feel like it's really necessary for this. Either the theology is kind of, we don't know, or it's so tied to a particular era, we just don't see it as being valued. Like it makes sense that it was done then because of this, but it doesn't make sense for now. So we did that, and then the other part of the work so we were working on that. We'd meet periodically to go through those things, talk through those things. We emailed all the time. We were sending indexes back and forth all the time, and keeping those lists. But we kept all of those indexes together, right? So you had the indexes of the comparison index of all the different hymnals. We had our working index. So all these spreadsheets and all these indexes we always had. And then what we did is so part of the work was all of us working together to figure out who are some of the major voices or contributors to music, hymnody, or worship in different traditions.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got the Nazarene. Who are some people that would be good consultants, advisors to us from the Nazarene Church? Who are some good consultants and advisors from the Church of God Anderson, from the Church of God Cleveland, from the Wesleyan denomination, from Free Methodist,
So did you start with a cap of this is the most we can put in here?
Yeah.
Okay. So
we knew our page number. Like we said, we're committed to 800 pages. No, it's not 800 songs, but 800 pages, which includes front material, indexes, liturgical material, and then the hymns.
Yeah.
So the huge bulk of that's going to be hymns and stuff. We had to say, like, all right, how much are we dedicating to liturgical material? Because every page we dedicate to liturgical material means a hymn's not in there.
Right.
Wow. How many pages are we dedicating to indexing? Because depending on that is how big the font's going to be on the indexes. And we can't go below a certain font. So things like that. So we knew roughly what. If you have, say that you have 750 pages left after all the other stuff, that needs to be done. So you have 750 pages, then we could say, all right, some hymns are going to be 2 pages, some hymns are going to be half a page, some will be a page and a half, and then so if we're looking at 750 hymns, let's just count on, or 750 pages, let's just count on that being maybe 730 hymns or something. I'm just making these numbers up, but we can count on that, potentially. So we know that just by, kind of the law of averages there and how hymnals work and how many, you average, instead of one hymn per page, you average one hymn per like 1.2 pages or something. Again, I don't know. I'm just making up these numbers.
But there would be, because you have a lot that are 2 pages.
Yeah, 2 pages or a page and a half.
Yeah.
So with that, just knowing, okay, we're going to have to make some decisions on this. So we had a limit. What was really cool, though, is that And we were doing work too. Like we were already ourselves saying, all right, as the advisors are advising us on things, we're already adding hymns to our working index and sending some of that out, as updates and stuff. But saying we're adding some hymns here because we realized, we didn't have anything on this, or this is a great hymn that it didn't appear here, some stuff like that. So they sent us all of their stuff back, and I'm trying to remember. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think we were able to include all but like 3 of the hymns that were suggested to us. Wow. And a number of them were suggested by multiple people, and so that made it easy. So you have 110 things that come back to you. And it's like, but 20 of these overlap. So now we're just down to 90. You know what? And again, I'm making up numbers here, but these are great. We'll hold on to these other 3 if there's space at the end, as has been suggested, because I think that was it. Anything that was a 1 or a 2, I think we were able to put in there. I don't remember, as I'm thinking back to it, I don't remember anything that somebody sent as a 1 or 2 that we did not include.
Wow, that's great.
So some of the others said, well, if there's space, we'll kind of set it aside for now. And I think at the end of it, there was only 3 that were suggested to us by our advisors that we didn't end up putting in.
Wow.
A few that we cut. A number of them that were suggested cut that we didn't, but definitely cut some based on those recommendations too. Even some suggestions made for adaptation, saying like, "Hey, look, you sent us this. What version of that hymn are you using? Like what tune?"
Yeah, because you do run into that.
Yeah, or even what wording. So we're able to talk through that and get their advice on some of that too.
Did you ever run into anything like with the keys of songs? Was there questions over what key a song should be in, or?
Yeah, the music side of it is interesting. So I'm going to kind of sidestep that for a moment and come back to it. So there were certain hymns that we ran into where the music was copyrighted because the arrangement was done just in the last 20 or 30 years. It wasn't public domain, so you could. I'm making up an example here, but just say, "O Come, O Come, Emmanuel." We were talking about that before we started recording. "O Come, O Come, Emmanuel." That tune, those words are really, really, really old. So that would be public domain, but the arrangement might be. No, that's not one. I think the arrangement of that one was public domain. But for instance, a song like that could be in there, but when we looked at it, we're like, that arrangement, though, is copyrighted from 1968 or 1972 or something, And we're like, okay, with that, we don't have the rights to that. We'd have to pay out rights to that, which we do. There's contemporary songs in here. There's Chris Tomlin songs, Getty songs, a good number of different songs there. And those are copyrighted and licensed and all that. And so part of, when you buy this hymnal, part of, every purchase to this hymn, every time a hymnal gets purchased, those songwriters get a royalty from that because we have your song in here. There's a percentage of that, and it's an annual thing. It's a small, you're talking about pennies on the dollar a lot of times. I don't know what it actually is. We did more than a lot of people do for what's paid out for this. But when you have, there's a lot of people included in that would get paid out. So that will go out to them every time one's published. So they're getting royalties from this because we were able to use their songs in the hymnal. So that's awesome that we could do that. But then there were some we were just like, we don't really need to use that arrangement. We could write our own, we could do our own. And so there were ones where Julie Tennant helped work on some arrangements, but Dick Torrance, who was our typesetter for the whole thing, that's what he does. Typesetter means he's the one that got the page to look like what it looks like in the hymn. He made the digital version of what the page looks like and put that together to go in the hymnal. So he's putting in the notes and the sharps and the flats and the bars and the words and getting it all to look almost like graphic design.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah. But he's also going through the music and make sure it's okay. But he's a fantastic musician and composer himself. Oh. So there were a handful of them. We just tossed to him and said, "Hey, would you mind creating new arrangements of these?" Because we think it'd be really good. So we were able to do that, and then other ones where it's the arrangement that's copyrighted. So the key's not copyrighted, for instance. So all we'd have to do with that is just tell Dick, like, hey, this one's a little bit high. It's in A flat, and we're hitting some really high notes in this. Could we maybe, or even E flat? So we're hitting this E flat a lot, which some people can do, but number probably you're going to struggle with. Could we maybe get that down to D or C? And so for him, it's just a matter of shifting it. Not a big deal. So he can do that. And then, some things can get, when you shift it, it's not as clean always as it seems. And so he'll have to go back through it to make sure everything's okay. Then he sends it to us, and we had Julie and Danny Key, and I think a couple other people that would play through every hymn multiple times. Oh, wow. Are there any notes missing? Is there a note wrong? Anything like that.
Oh, man. Yeah, I didn't think about the musical proofreading that had to go into this.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So we did all that, and then, so both on the arrangement or the keys and things like that, we could say to him, we'd like to shift this, if we could. So,
wow,
yeah,
just so much, and
yeah,
I do think it's interesting though. So I know maybe a lot of our audience comes from contemporary background or currently in contemporary churches. Some may never have encountered a hymnal, and that seems very strange to me because growing up, it was just hymnals.
Yeah, right.
So why do you think now is a good time for this, and why is this hymnal relevant?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there was that. People, I would get that when I tell people, like, what are you working on now? I'm working on a hymnal. A hymnal? Like, really? Right. And then to tell them, it's sold out, like, within a couple months. We're already in second printing. It's not even been 6 months yet, since it released. Well, I guess it has now. But, it's sold out, I think, before 6 months, we're already on a second printing within a year of its release. It shows that there's still value for it, and people want it. There's a lot of relevance to it. One of the things about a hymnal is it is a canon. Like, it's very intentionally done. It's not just vague. It's saying, like, no, these are songs that we have carefully chosen. As we just talked about, like, all the process that went into that, right? They're carefully chosen for a reason, and even theologically, our organizing principle of it is the Apostles' Creed. So the table of contents is ordered according to the Apostles' Creed. You find the hymns according to the Apostles' Creed, how they fit within that. But that was one of the things, is we said it has to fit. Like, if we have trouble figuring out how does a song fit to some point of the Apostles' Creed, then maybe it's not as strong of a song as we thought it is, or saying, like, it still be a fine song, it just doesn't fit the scope of this hymnal.
Yeah.
So there's intentionality to all of that, and so it's a curated resource, right? Like, it's been curated with intent, and part of it too is to say, back to the catechesis and discipleship. For the Wesleys, one of the reasons that they made hymn books was not just for public worship. It was, but not just for public worship. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but in the Wesleys' day, hymns weren't sung on Sunday mornings in the churches.
Really?
It was psalms that you sang on Sunday mornings. So there was a lot of pushback about bringing hymns into Sunday morning worship.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and Wesley himself, his own stance on music, he didn't want to have a whole lot of music in the Sunday morning Eucharist. Like in certain areas it was okay. But he was really resistant to bringing, like, lots of music on Sunday morning. Now, the society meetings, the Methodist gatherings, so, like, sing robustly, or sing lustily, as he says, as when you sing the songs of the devil, right, and his rules for singing. So it's not that he wasn't anti-music by any means. It's just like he had this kind of clear distinction of what it's for. But all that's to say, they're producing hymnals all the time. So it's like, well, if you're not using them on Sunday mornings that much, then why produce all these hymnals? Like, they produce tons of hymnals. Well, it's because it was meant to take home with you. It was a discipleship resource. In their large hymnal that they produced, that was really meant to be for these Methodist societies. They produced that hymnal, and in the preface to it, when he's talking about this, he says it's to give a full count of scriptural Christianity. From initial belief to perfection. So it's meant to guide you through that, to tell you about Jesus, to tell you about the story of Christ, the story of God, about God's love for us, about God's grace, to even help us understand doctrine of entire sanctification, to save us to the uttermost. There's a hymn in there that Charles Wesley wrote called "Jesus, We Look to Thee," and I love the last verse of it because it really gets into some of this. The Christian perfection, the doctrine of Christian perfection starts to be articulated in a beautiful way in that last verse of that hymn. And so it's like, these things that it's giving you a full account of scriptural Christianity from initial belief to full salvation and Christian perfection.
Yeah.
So it's a resource devotionally to read it. J.D. Walt's using it for that with the daily text or whatever they did with seedbed.
Okay.
So you do this. They do a study and then they sing a hymn every day. And I have people come up to me all the time saying that, like, love the hymnal, singing, using it and singing it every day with J.D. Walt. And so it's meant to be used in the home with the family. Learn these songs, learn about God, help us understand who God is, how God works, what is God's relationship to us, what is our relationship to God, what is the relationship with God and us and the world and all of this. And so it's doing all that. So it's providing that resource for families, for individuals. So it's more than just the Sunday morning worship, although it's still great for Sunday morning worship. It teaches us how to sing. We have the words there that we can look through and see kind of all there on the same page. It helps us in singing with one voice. We have the music and the parts. We can start to learn.
Yeah, which is something that we miss in contemporary settings where we're doing everything by ear.
Yeah. And that's why we wanted to include contemporary things in here, is because we said the other thing about a hymnal is it's like a historical artifact. It's not just that, but it does kind of stand in the long history of the church and the world as a historical artifact to say, look, at this point of history, these were songs that a group of people thought were really important to have as part of their worship, and we kind of have that in the Psalms in a way. Again, it's more than that, but we can look back and see like, oh, look at what they actually sang in their worship in the Old Testament, So there's that, and to say, so it's representing who we are as the church and our doctrinal values, but our worship values too. And so that's why we said, like, we've got to have contemporary songs here. 10,000 Reasons. That song has been on the top CCLI since it came out,
Yeah.
So it's like, and it's a great song. We're like, we'd be stupid not to put it in here, because there's something really important about this song in the church for us, So we put that in there. How great is our God, And some of these people say, like, well, I don't see how that's really a hymn. And say, like, well, we've put it in this hymn form. We know it might not be done as hymn. You might have it on the screens and all that. But you get to see it here, and it gets to stand, and it shows, like, we think that song is important enough that we're going to take up 2 pages of this hymnal to put how great is our God in there, because we believe in it. King of Kings, there's great theology in that.
Yes.
We're going to put it in there. Living Hope, we're going to put it in there. The one that we decided to end with there's a kind of a formational piece of this, liturgical piece of this, a worship piece of this, but also a historical piece of this was the very last hymn we're going to put in there is The Blessing. That was done by Passion, I think, Carrie Job. Carrie Job. And some of the, so they wrote that, they recorded it, but part of it was to say, we were working on this hymnal during COVID. This hymnal came out not too long after COVID. But during COVID, that song was such an important song for so many people. It came out in 2019. But it's the newest song in there, in the sense of it was written in 2019. So the newest song in that way. And we have songs from the first century in there. And Psalms in here too, so I'd be even before then. So there's a big scope here. But to say that song was so important to us culturally. There were so many of those videos of the groups singing together, the virtual choirs singing together to that song. And there was something about it, and it just sustained people, and it was a good reminder to people. And it's still popular. People still love it and sing it all the time. But we just said, But that had a very special meaning and purpose during COVID. Like it came out at the right time because we needed it during COVID, you know? And we want to end with that because it's a blessing. It is. It's a perfect song to end with anyway. But even in this historical period, the juxtaposition of what we all went through then and when this hymnal is coming out, we just want that to be the final word, you know?
Yeah.
So so that's an example.
That's very cool.
Artifact piece of it. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing about both of these books. And,
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So where can people get both of them?
Yeah. So New Life in the Risen Christ is published through Cascade. So you can go to Cascade or Wipfenstock is the kind of the larger umbrella. Cascade falls under kind of their academic wing. But so you can go to Cascade or Wipfenstock and get it directly from the publisher, or you can get it on Amazon. It's sold on Amazon. I think you can even order. Actually, I just saw, this was random. I just saw that you can order it through Target.
Really?
So,
well,
if you really want to get it through Target, but the easiest is probably Amazon. They have digital copies there too, Kindle. So you can get the hard copy or get the Kindle copy on Amazon. I think Barnes and Noble's the same with the Nook and the hard copy. And then the hymnal get through Seedbed. So you can order it directly through Seedbed. Go to their website. It's not too difficult to find.
Yeah, and we'll put links in the show notes and everything, so we'll have all that.
Well, and with the link, there's a really great link to Our Great Redeemer's Praise, and I think it's just ourgreatredeemerspraise.com, like just all as one word. And it'll give you links to order the hymnal and all that and connect you to Seedbed. But that site is made specifically for the hymnal. It has videos about the hymnal. It has information about the hymnal, previews of the hymnal. So there's a lot in that site and everything. So that one was made just for the hymnal and kind of expands, the information and all that. So you can look at a number of different things. So Seedbed, but also that one.
Yeah, that's a great resource. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, one last question that we have, and I think we probably asked you the last time you were on the podcast, but since this is the Thrive with Asbury Seminary podcast, what is one thing in your life right now that's helping you thrive?
Yeah, that's such a good question. There's two things that come to mind immediately. So don't know when this is going to air, but we're recording this at the end of the summer, and it's just been a good rhythm of family life. Like this summer, we've done a lot of really fun things together. That's just been so good and so life-giving. Vacation together and just these special trips, and finding those opportunities to just get out like that, together. That has been so nice. And so just doing that family life is so good. And the summer gives space to that, 'cause, the school year can get really busy and everything. But to be intentional about it, and it's put to the forefront for us, like we need to be more intentional, because we can easily say, oh, we should plan something and then wait kind of last minute to try to get something. It ends up being something short and something, but being more intentional about, like, let's go ahead and look at this weekend and decide what we're going to do and get on the calendar and start working on it, because what we found too is we're also a kind of family that the anticipation for something is part of the joy of it, not just doing it. It's the anticipation leading up to it. That's part of the joy for us. So, so that's been good. Like just all of that, definitely wonderful. And the other one on a more, and that's definitely personal, but I guess on the more individual level, I really get into reading church history, like reading patristic writings, stuff like that. For me is something about it. I feel like I'm thinking about God with them.
Interesting.
Something about it, and others too, but especially patristic writings. For some reason, it's like I feel like I'm just able to think about God with them. They're not telling me what to think about God, but they're inviting me to think with them about God. And I just find that is such a rich practice for me. And I have rhythms, like sometimes when I'm like just deep into those readings, and other times when I haven't read much, from the early church or church history and all that. But finding those voices, those men and women, Augustine, Catherine of Siena, whoever it might be, but finding those folks to hear their voices and to just say like, yeah, let's just think about God together. It's just enriching to my soul. And I think part of it too is kind of like what we were saying with David Watson's chapter here in this book. There's just this consistency in pointing to the beauty of God, of who God is, the beauty of God's character. And I need to be reminded of that, because I can get so caught up in doctrinal truth or theology. That's important, incredibly important, but I can get so focused on it that I forget, well, the whole point of all this anyway is to help me see the face of God.
Yeah.
And if I'm not beholding the face of God in any of this, then I've put my focus ultimately on the wrong thing. Even reading the Bible, I can read the Bible to understand the Bible. And it's like, if I'm doing it to understand the Bible, I'm not, it's meant to draw me to God and see the face of God. And so to find those that help me, that keep pointing me to the face of God, to pointing me to the character of God, and help me think about God and to see the beauty of God. I just need it. And so this summer, I've been getting into some more stuff with that again, where it kind of got set aside for a little while. Just getting into that again has been so good. I just love it.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you again for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you for
It was a
asking.
great conversation. And we'll have the links to these books for everybody. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.